Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to be looking at Isaiah chapter 36. And that chapter 36 speaks about Jerusalem being delivered. That's the primary theme. But it also speaks to Hezekiah, the king at that time, and his obedience and seeking God, his atonement, if you will. Now, Isaiah chapter 36 is duplicated almost verbatim in 2 Kings. 2 Kings was written not too many years after Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, and 2 Kings repeats it verbatim almost the entire chapter 36 of Isaiah, which is indication that it's an important chapter, that it needs to be narrated twice in the Bible. Isaiah was written about 750 BC, 2 Kings about 700 BC, so shortly thereafter the author of 2 Kings added this chapter of Isaiah. Now, up until this point, we've had a lot of discussion about the woes that the nation of Israel was facing, both Israel and Judah. And now this is sort of the consummation of those difficulties that they're facing. The difficulties have been central to the narrative that we've been dealing with up until this time. At this point, Assyria has conquered just about everything in the region. They've conquered all of Israel. They've conquered all the nations around, Edom and all that. The only thing they haven't conquered is the city of Jerusalem. So this chapter is going to speak about how Jerusalem is going to be delivered from Assyria. We'll see in the first verse that this says it's during the time of the king Hezekiah. Now, Hezekiah was the son, his predecessor was his father Ahaz. Ahaz was not a good guy. He was an evil king. He walked in disobedience. He set up idol worship. He did not honor the temple. He was not a good guy. So, oddly enough, his son was just the opposite. He's a great king. He's a God-fearing, faithful man. One of the first things he did in the first year of his realm is he destroyed the places of worship, of idol worship, that had been set up in the high places. And he, most equally important, he reestablished temple worship. He made the temple central to the worship of the folks. So what are we going to look at what are we going to look for as we go through Isaiah chapter 36? Well, first of all, the first lesson that we're going to see that this is a real lesson in trust. And these are things that we can embrace ourselves as we go through this. It's a lesson of trust. And the second one that I really enjoyed dealing with is there's a lot of warning here about how Satan deceives, the deception Satan uses, and the techniques he uses to deceive us. Even those that are faithful, like Hezekiah. So watch for those as we go through this chapter. So starting in verse 1, it says, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah. So it's great that they establish a time frame, because this is a historical account. Remember, this is not just theology here, although there's a lot of theology in it. It's a historical account. And it starts at the 14th year of King Hezekiah. And it says, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. So by the 14th year of Hezekiah, the Assyrian Empire was able to conquer all of those cities all throughout Judah, except for Jerusalem. And they use the adverb here, the adjective, that these were fortified cities. So this was clearly a war that's going on. They just didn't come in. They had to conquer them. And it says in verse 2, and the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh from Lachish to Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army, and he stood, that would be the Rabshakeh, and he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. It took me about 4 days reading through this and studying that Rabshakeh is not the name of the guy. That's his title. He's the Rabshakeh. And the Rabshakeh could have a couple different meanings. It could be that he was, certainly he was a high official, and he was a spokesperson for the king of Assyria, but his title probably means that he was field commander. He was the Dwight Eisenhower in the European theater, or the Douglas MacArthur in the Pacific theater. He was the field commander. He was a pretty high official in the Assyrian empire. Or it could mean that he was the chief cupbearer. Either way, he was an important guy. And it says he came from Lachish. Now Lachish is 35 miles from Jerusalem. And it says here that Lachish was conquered. It was overwhelmed by the Assyrians. And we know this to be true because there's actually an archaeological record of this. Just a couple decades ago, they discovered a mass grave site in that town, in that city of Lachish, or whatever it is. And there was 1,500 bodies in there. So it was clear that something happened there. And also in the British Museum, there's a piece of remnant, a carving, that describes the siege of that city. So we have this, again, an archaeological record that attests to the biblical account, which gives us great comfort, doesn't it? That we know the Bible is absolutely true. I mean, we know it, but now we even have proof. So anyway, he comes from Lachish, and he says he stood by the conduit of the upper pool with a great army. So here's the picture. Here's this guy coming. He's conquered all over the place. Every place he's gone, he's conquered a city. And he comes with a great army, not just an army, but a great army. And he stands by the conduit of this, what does it say here again? The upper pool. This was the water source for the city of Jerusalem. So get the picture. The field commander, who has great success, has a great army behind him, and he goes to the water source of the city, and this is where he's going to make his claims. Sort of scary for the guys in Jerusalem, I would think. Well, having seen this, it says in verse 3, and there came out to him, that would be the Rabshakeh, Eliakim, who was the son of Hilkiah. I'm sorry, I didn't study Greek, so I don't know what these names are. But this guy was over the household. So he was the chief of staff for the King Hezekiah. And also coming out is Shebna. He was the secretary. And coming out was Joah, the son of Asaph. He was the recorder. So you have these three emissaries from the palace that come out to meet this Assyrian commander. Getting the picture? This is like Cecil B. DeMille, right? This is really cool. This is a great picture here. This is really fun. I love this chapter because there's a lot of fun in here because we have this dialogue that's going on. It's mostly a monologue. And I will start this in verse 4 here. It says, and the Rabshakeh said to the emissaries of King Hezekiah, he says, say to Hezekiah, thus says the great king of Assyria, on what do you rest this trust of yours? So he's there to conquer the city. The city is they're not wanting to have that happen. So he says, how could you possibly have any trust in anything that would keep me and our armies from taking you over? Well, here we have a lesson in faith. This is one of the lessons we have here. That Hezekiah has faith in the God of the universe, Yahweh, the God of the Jews. But when you look at the Assyrians, this is a polytheistic culture. And they don't quite understand the notions of obedience and generosity and purity and humility. And they, in our culture, we have the same thing. We have non-believers that don't understand those ethical concepts that we hold dear of obedience and generosity and purity and humility. And they challenge us about that because they don't understand where we're standing, the place that we're standing. And a great example of that is a movie that came out in 1996, I think. It was called Wall Street. Does anybody ever remember seeing that movie? A great line in that movie that goes to this exact point where Gordon Gekko says, "Greed is good." And that was the culture in the late 1990s. And that's what we have here. This is the differences we have from the believers and the non-believers. This is the difference we have from the Assyrians and the Jews. And the Rabshakeh, he doesn't understand that. And that's why he says, what do you rest this trust to use? On what do you rest this trust of yours? And then he goes on and he says, do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? Do you think that mere words are strategy and power for wars? He's saying, do you think diplomacy is going to do anything? I have this great army. I'm standing by your water source. And you think you can come out and tactfully and diplomatically convince me not to take you out? Well, we're going to see here that this Rabshakeh guy is very clever in his speech. Now watch for this as we go through this section. First of all, he's going to say, Egypt can't be of any help to you guys. Egypt was always a temptation for Hezekiah to ally himself with. He thought he had to wrestle with the fact that Egypt could be a military force that could help him withstand the Assyrian invasion. There was a constant battle. Isaiah constantly was trying to keep him on the straight and narrow, but the temptation for Egypt to help was always with Hezekiah. And the Rabshakeh here is going to play on that fear that Hezekiah had. And then the second thing that the Rabshakeh is going to talk about is he's going to say, the Lord's not going to help you guys because your king destroyed the high places of worship. And remember I told you in the first year of his reign, Hezekiah destroyed the high places, the worship of the idols. Well, the Assyrians don't realize that those idols were not places to place your faith in, but it was the God of the universe that they were placing their faith in. So the Assyrians are saying, because you destroyed these places of worship, you're going to have no help from a spiritual end. And he's going to also, later on, he's going to say, and besides that, not only can you not depend on Egypt, not only can you not depend on idols to save you, but you don't even have enough manpower in Judah, in Jerusalem, to be able to withstand this great army. And then, if that's not enough, he's going to say, and besides that, we Assyrians have a divine authority. We are sent because God wants us to capture you guys. So Rabshakeh is going to say, don't put your trust in Egypt because they won't help you. Now here's a lesson for us. Satan uses truth to devise lies. So Rabshakeh is saying Egypt can't help you, which is right. But what he doesn't say is there's an alternative, and that's the God of the universe. And he does the same thing with us, right? And he's saying this to demoralize the people. that they have no hope. They don't have Egypt, they don't have gods, they don't have manpower, they don't have weaponry. How are you ever going to be able to stand up against Assyria? So in our case, for instance, Satan might say, you are nothing but a wretched sinner, which is true. We are nothing but wretched sinners, except the second part is the blood of Jesus Christ atoned us from that, and now we are pure. Satan, that's how he deceives. He gives half-truths, but he doesn't give the whole truth. Okay, so going on to verse 6 now. He says, behold, you are trusting in Egypt. And here is how he defines Egypt. He says, the broken reed of a staff, which will pierce the hand of any man who leans on it. Such as Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. Another, Egypt is impotent. There's no way they're going to be able to help you. And then he goes on to say in verse 7, but if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar? So the Assyrian here is saying, you can't trust in God because your king destroyed the places that you were worshiping him at. But he doesn't realize that where they're now worshiping is exactly where God would have them worship. And we go all the way back to Leviticus 17. And it says, the Lord said to Moses, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all Israelites and say to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Any Israelite who sacrifices an ox, a lamb, or a goat in the camp or outside of it, instead of bringing it to the entrance of the tent of the meeting, that would be the temple in this case, to present it as an offering to the Lord in front of the tabernacle of God, the Lord, that person shall be considered guilty of bloodshed, and that shed blood, and have shed blood, and must be cut off from their people. Clear commandment from God that worship should be done in the temple, not any place out, not outside. Sacrifices were not to be done away from the temple. It's very attractive for people to worship God outside the temple. In our culture, we have people that claim to worship God outside the church. You'll hear often a person say, I believe in God, but I'm just not a religious person. This is what's speaking to here. God commands us to be in communion with each other, to be in faith with each other, to worship with each other. And that's what we're commanded to do. So, again, Satan giving half-truths. Half-truths. Now, and then in verse 8, the Rabshakeh continues to heap on fear and terror to the people, where he says, come now, make a wager with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you're able on your part to set riders on them. Ha! This is cool. So the Rabshakeh says, I'll make you a bet. I'll give you 2,000 horses, and I'll bet you can't even find the people to ride them. That's like saying to Iran, I'll give you all this. Oh, no, I'm not going to go there. Scrap that. That's like saying to somebody, I'm going to prepare you for something, but you're not even going to be able to use it. I'm going to give you a car that can go 200 miles an hour, but you have to drive it on city streets. It's the same thing. So he's making him a bet. He's saying, he even says that. It's great. Come now, make a wager. Bet the king of Assyria that even if I gave you these things, you still would be not able to come against us. And then in verse 9 he says, how then can you repulse a single captain among the least of my master's servants when you trusted Egypt for chariots and horsemen. So the Rabshakeh is saying, even the worst of my regiments, even the worst of my battalions, with the worst commander that I have, still is better than anything you can bring forth. They still will be able to conquer you and make you and put you out of business to take you over. And then he goes on more. Can you imagine this guy standing out there just yakking and yakking and yakking and trying, heaping coals and coals on top of these people, trying to make them be fearful and full of terror. And then in verse 10 he says, moreover, is it without the Lord that I have come up against this land to destroy it? This is the trump card. The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. So the claim here by the Rabshakeh is that Assyria is on God's mission. Assyria is on God's mission to destroy Jerusalem. And given all of Assyria's successes thus far, that could be believable. He's taken over every city in the region. Well, having heard enough, the emissaries of Hezekiah, it says how they respond here in verse 11. It says, then Eliakim, Shebna, and Joab said to the Rabshakeh, please speak to your servants, that would be those three guys, in Aramaic. Aramaic was the language of diplomacy at that time. They say, for we understand it. Even though they were speaking their native language is the language of Judah, these emissaries are saying, we understand Aramaic, you can speak to us in that. They say, do not speak to us in the language of Judah within the hearing of the people who are on the wall. So your little picture there on your outline, you see that the emissaries of Hezekiah are on the wall. Some of the people there from the city of Jerusalem are on the wall because they have a vested interest. They're listening. They're wondering what's going on. And the emissaries of Hezekiah say, we don't want these people to hear what you're saying because you're going to just instill fear and terror in them and you're going to cause division. And they're not going to have the faith that the leadership that Hezekiah is providing has for us. But the Rabshakeh, I hate that word, I can't pronounce it. The Rabshakeh, he responds and he says, has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not let the men sitting on the wall who are, I'm going to stop right there. The men. So he said, do you think I just came to talk to you diplomatically? I want everybody that in the city of Jerusalem to understand what's going on here. This is sort of like in our time when they had diplomatic discussions and there's a news blackout. We don't know what's going on. So the Rabshakeh here said, you can't have a news blackout. Everybody needs to know, because he goes on to say that the men sitting on the wall who are doomed, this is nasty, with you, emissaries, to eat their own dung and drink their own urine. Not a very pleasant picture, but that's the threat that the Rabshakeh is posing for the people of Jerusalem. And then in verse 13, this guy's nasty, but he's a good negotiator. He really is. He says then in verse 13, then the Rabshakeh stood, and instead of talking in Aramaic, it says he stood and called out in a loud voice in the language of Judah, hear the great words of the great king of Assyria. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you. trying to cause division. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you. His plan for this city is not going to succeed. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord by saying the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. That's what Hezekiah is proclaiming to the people. He goes on to say, do not let Hezekiah, thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace with me and come out to me. Here's the carrot is going to be given, and he's giving it to the people on the wall, not to the king's emissaries. Then each one of you will not eat their own dung, but they will eat of his own vine. And each one will own a fig tree, and each one will drink the water of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to the land of your own land, the land of grape and wine and land and bread and vineyards. If you surrender, life's going to be good. You're going to be exiled, which was the common practice of the Assyrians, to exile those that he conquers. We're going to bring you to this wonderful land. It's going to be a land of milk and honey. There's going to be lots of benefits for you that you don't have now. All you have to do is give up. And this is another lesson that we have for ourselves. Satan wants us to surrender. When things are difficult, the easiest thing for lots of us to do sometimes is to surrender, to give ourselves over, rather than stay in the fight. You know, whether you have a health problem, a relational problem, to be able to stay in the fight rather than surrender is what God would have us to do, but that is against what Satan would like to see us do.
Hey Robert, could I make a comment?
Can you hold that till we're finished? Thank you. And it says in verse 18, beware, lest Hezekiah mislead you, saying, the Lord will deliver us. Has any gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? So he's made the plea, and now he's telling them why they should make the surrendering decision. He says, have they delivered, where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Those are cities that were conquered by the Assyrians. So he's saying, look at what's already happened. God hasn't helped them. He's not going to help you. And he says, who among all the gods of these lands, who of those gods from those cities have delivered their lands out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? He's saying, God hasn't delivered any of these cities. Why would you think he's going to deliver your city? That's the point he's making. Again, deception. Using truth, but not giving the whole truth. And just a second, Matt, I'll get right to you. And then he wraps it up. Isaiah wraps up this section and says, but they were silent. Speaking of the emissaries. So this is a good lesson for us, that we don't have to respond to charges. That accusations don't necessarily deserve a response. And hostility to our peace needn't be addressed pointedly. We can trust that we can give it over to God. We can trust in him. And it says, they were silent and answered him not a word, for the king's command was, don't answer them. But that's not to say they weren't troubled, because we see in verse 22, it says, then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, and Shebna, the secretary, Joab, the son of Asaph, the recorder, came to Hezekiah with their clothes torn. They were troubled. They were in deep distress. And they told him the words of the Rabshakeh. And just to wrap it up, we have an example here with Paul. on how to respond in these very difficult times. In 2 Corinthians 4, where it says, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed, because God is on our side." Matt, what did you have to?
Thank you for that. One of the things that always struck me about this story is Francis Schaeffer wrote a book called Death in the City that was a terrific book about Jeremiah. And the Isaiah, in this section, Hezekiah is standing fast against an invading army. And he's told to do so. But he had three choices. The people had three choices. They could starve, they could be conquered, or they could give up. Those same three choices were offered about 100 years later through Jeremiah the prophet to the same city by an invading army of Babylonians. And what were they told to do? They were told to give up.
Mm-hmm.
They were told, go to Babylon. Live in this city. You're under judgment. And that's what the book was all about. Judgment comes, it falls. So it's not always, oh, we're to resist the enemy. How did they know that they were supposed to fight in Hezekiah's day? How did they know that they were supposed to give up in Jeremiah's day?
Well, the only way is to seek God's wisdom and His truth, right?
They had Isaiah. And Isaiah said, absolutely not. You go out and you fight, and then we know the great story that Robert's going to tell us of what happened here. But in Jeremiah was called the weeping prophet because he wept over Jerusalem. He lamented over Jerusalem because he understood judgment was going to come. It was as if America was told, give up to Iran. Let them come in, let them take over, and let them go to live. That was the same attitude that they had. Jeremiah, what are you saying? How can you even be saying this? This is not possible. Jeremiah said, it is possible. You profane God's word for all these years. 70 years you're going to be in captivity because you haven't kept the Sabbaths. Judgments come. Death in the City by Francis Schaeffer. It's a very good book on this.
Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but His smile quickly drives it away. Not a doubt nor a fear, not a sign